All right. I think I am good. Just double checking on all my stuff here. We're good to go. All right, what's up, guys? Welcome to another edition, or whatever you want to call this episode of Live Inc. So I kind of thought this week's episode would be fun if I just kind of continued my talk from last week about just kind of certain things that I just really think very passionately about, of just like drawing and getting better at drawing, and like putting in practice and finding ways to study and art and all this kind of stuff. And so I just kind of thought today's topic would be a fun one if I just kind of talked about what we call growth mindset. I mentioned this a little bit kind of in passing in the last episode of this live show. And I think we're going to start off with this one. So first of all, I'm just going to kind of talk about a couple of different things. So number one, inking more pages from Analog Missions. Guys, I've got a lot of really cool stuff coming down the pipeline here that you guys are going to be really excited for, I think. Number one being a preview of the first 10 chapters of the book, 10 pages of the book. That I'm going to release to anybody on our mailing list. So I'm going to put that, how to subscribe to our mailing list, in the show notes. And also going to put a couple other random things in the show notes that I might talk about throughout this. If you guys watch our I'd Rather Be Motivated podcast, you know that this is one thing that we're trying to be better about. Just like actually putting things into the show notes that we talk about during the episode for you guys to kind of like continue to explore after you're done listening to us, kind of thing. Because I think that's pretty cool and important. Being a educational guy and all that kind of stuff, it's kind of one of those things that continually exploring and educating yourself on a topic is a pretty big important thing for me, right? So actually the page I'm inking right now is one I haven't shown any kind of previews of. I just realized as I sat down to ink that I had left my other notebook at home and just needed something to ink on, so I'm inking on this page. I'm trying to kind of work my flow kind of in a at first it was like pencil everything, and all that kind of, other way around, man. See, I'm doing that thing where I'm real focused already on this page because I love this page, and I'm already slipping up on my talk. So it was pencil, ink, like screen tone it, scan it. All right, I'm done. Move on to the next one. I found that my flow works way better if I do them in chunks. So I'm kind of trying to do like pencil out the whole chapter, scan in the whole chapter, like tone the whole chapter, scan in the whole chapter, and then kind of like that. Kind of in that way I can work back and forth too. So like right now, like I have chapter 1 all scanned in and ready to go. So I'm able to jump over and pencil some of the stuff if I have some free time. I kind of just always have something that I can be working on now by doing it this way. Before it was a little bit of like, oh, well, if I left my thing at home and now I don't have my thing to ink, well, I guess I'm not working on anything today because I left everything at home. And that was a really bad way for me to work. So now that I've kind of played with this a little bit more and I've gotten pretty far into my progress here, I'm able to kind of play back and forth, right? So that's progress on Analog Missions. So let's jump in and let's start talking. So growth mindset. So this is a really big, important thing that I feel like a lot of new artists kind of need to hear this more than maybe some of the more experienced kind of dudes who follow us and do our channel stuff. But there's always something new to learn or hear, right? So this is the idea that you're not a fixed mindset is a good way of starting off, right? This is the opposite. This is the idea that like wherever you're at or whatever you bring to the table is a good way of putting it. Like in terms of your talent or innate ability, you'll never really get very far past it. A lot of people with that kind of mindset believe that like as you move through stuff, you're getting better because you're unlocking more of just like your already potential, but that there's a cap on your potential, kind of is a good way of putting it. Like you will only ever progress so far, or as far as you can let yourself progress or be let by what you're born with is a good way of putting that, right? So the opposite of that is growth mindset, and it's the idea that every single time that you sit down to mess with whatever thing is your passion, right? Whatever part of your process is drawing, it's music, it's sports or crocheting, right? Whatever your thing is that every time you sit down, you're only going to unlock so much of your potential in that thing. And so what ends up happening with that kind of mindset is that like you kind of, when you don't feel like you're getting better, you will tell yourself that you've already hit that cap and that's why you can't get any better, and you kind of start making excuses and that kind of stuff. And that's never a good place to be at with any kind of hobby or passion or whatever however serious you're taking your endeavor, right? So the opposite of that thing is this, which is that growth mindset is that practice makes better, right? You've probably heard people say like practice makes perfect and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not a huge fan of that saying either, because man, even the most masterful of people at their craft are not perfect, and they'll tell you that. So like, practice makes better, right? So the idea is that every time I sit down to practice something or try something new, I tell myself I will be and I am getting better at this thing, right? So the opposite side of that here is the rules. Deliberate practice, I guess, is a good way of putting it, right? The idea here is that you are actually purposefully sitting down to practice a specific part of that thing, right? Or like maybe if you're making a finished drawing or whatever you're doing, you kind of know that like in this thing you're going to be doing this new thing to the drawing, or this thing, this skill you have that you're applying to, right? So the idea is that you have to actually be deliberate with this thing. Like if you sit down every day to draw and you draw a square, you're going to get really good at drawing that specific square, but that is all that you're going to get good at, is just drawing that square. You might also pick up on making cleaner straight lines, like being more confident in your strokes, your line weights and stuff like that. But if all you're ever drawing is a square, then all you're ever going to get better at is that thing. And so the idea here, and this is the mixture of the thing, I think this is why some people get tripped up on this whenever they hear or whenever they think this, because they're like, oh, well, I don't know, I've been drawing for 3 weeks every day and I look back and I'm still not any better. And it's like, well, what have you been spending that time doing? Have you been spending that time just drawing whatever just comes to your mind and doodling circles and putting random things on a page? Or have you been spending that time finding out that there are rules to art and there are ways to get better at art, that if you deliberately practice those things, you'll get better at those things, right? So drawing squares is actually great, right? Form and shape drawing is actually super good. But if you're not taking that and applying that to the next level, which is, okay, now look out in the world and know that everything and every complex object or subject you find will be a combination of these simple forms and shapes that you've been drawing, then you're literally only going to ever get good at that first level of that thing. So you have to be deliberate in your practice of whatever your skill is. You can't just start making excuses for yourself because you tell me you've been drawing every day, but the only thing you've been drawing every day is an eye, right? And you're like, okay, cool. That means you're probably getting better at drawing eyes. Well, then you're like, well, but I want to get better at drawing faces. And you're like, well, then you need to be practicing the entire face and not just the eye, right? And this is not me saying that you shouldn't spend 3 weeks just drawing eyes, because that's actually great use of your time. But that's saying, understand you only ever get better at that part of that practice that you're practicing, right? So you keep that sort of thing in mind. Sorry, I have to click a thing over here real quick. That practice makes better, and you have to practice deliberately, right? So this is a part of that, which is that you got to learn the rules before you break them. I think this is a really huge sort of thing too for like new artists or even old artists, right? You've been doing your thing for so long. You've been telling yourself like, oh, well, I'm trying to develop my style, so I'm not trying to look at too many other artists, or I don't want to. I like cartooning stuff, so I'm not trying to learn proportion. And you're like, well, that's not how that works, right? You want to be a cartoonist, even the most cartoony of cartoonists, right? Let's go with sort of in honor of a recent loss that we've had in the world of cartooning, SpongeBob, right? Even the guys who draw that and who have made that show have behind their belt just like all of the knowledge they need to draw as realistically as they can. But then they take those rules that they've learned and that style and that thing, and they break them, right? Because I've heard it said, and I love it, and I've kind of heard different variations of this, but that style is how you break the rules. It's everything you do wrong, basically, right? And I've said this before in one of our podcasts, I know, because I kind of shared this because I really like this way of looking at it. But the idea is you have all these rules to learn about line weight, about form, about proportion and emphasis and all these other elements and principles and things to kind of learn about. And then you get to throw them out the window, right? As soon as you've learned them, then you're like, okay, cool. Now I know how to do a perfect face. Well, did you know that if you take that proportion that you've just learned of that face and you stretch it by 2, it'll still work, but then you'll get a really cool exaggerated jawline or whatever that thing is, right? So the idea here is that rules are not meant to be ignored. They're just meant to be broken. They have to be learned first. And I know it's like I'm repeating this over and over again, but it's because I just think it's really important to kind of understand that thing of like, you're not doing yourself any good by literally just like ignoring the thing and saying like, this is my style, right? The difference between like a bad drawing and a good drawing is bad drawings break the rules when they don't know they are. Like when you look at a really, or even yourself, your own drawings, and you're like, oh, why can't I figure this thing out? I want big eyes, like I want to draw like anime, and I want this kind of thing. Well, okay, well there's lots of rules actually to that and how to make that work. And if you're just drawing the wrong size shapes and forms and they look bad, it's because you're breaking the rules when you don't mean to break the rules, right? You got to develop the rules, you got to develop your style, and it all kind of happens all at the same time. It's kind of like a back and forth mixture of like sit down and practice the actual correct form, the correct proportion, the correct shapes to something, and then you can sit down later after you've like done them so many times that you've mastered that, and you can completely ignore that, and then you'll end up with sort of what you will consider, what people will consider to be style, which is like sort of finding ways to bend and break the rules that are there for a reason, because they make better drawings and better art and better things in between, right? So I like to kind of use analogies. This is kind of like my thing. So my analogy I always use for this one for my students, I like to use music and I like to use sports as an analogy, because tons of students sort of have that sort of that side of their life to it. But you're never going to just like find someone off the street who's never thrown a football before. Like I'm a great example of this, right? I didn't even know the rules to football until last year, because I volunteered to help out at the football games at school. And so I had to learn the rules and I learned all this stuff, right? You're not going to stick me out in the field and be like, okay, play this whatever random play. Like, see, I know so much not about football, I can't even name a play. And then be like, oh, what was that? You didn't just feel the innate ability and talent in there and just throw that ball or whatever. And I'm like, no, I don't even know how to throw it. So the same with music, right? You don't just like, you're never told, okay, here is a musical instrument, like just feel it and see what happens. But for some reason, we do that with art. We're like, oh yeah, just kind of like, just feel it, like express yourself, be creative in quotations, since I'm drawing and I can't actually make quotations with my hands, right? But it's like, why is art the only field where we just do this to ourselves, and to just sort of the general attitudes and practices of art to be like, okay, well, if you're not good at it, you'll never be good at it. So you can go ahead and quit. Oh, you're pretty good at it. Okay, you can keep drawing and you might get better. It's like, no, dude, that's how everybody is. The minute you pick up something brand new you've never done before, you know nothing about that and you don't know how to do anything with that thing. So it's just one of those things that just blows my mind all the time, that people come in to things like drawing and art and expect to like already be a master of that thing. And if they're not, oh, too bad. That's you, right? Yeah, thanks, Dee Dee. Yeah, it's just such a strange thing, but it happens all the time. So thanks for joining the chat. Okay, so I'm gonna move on to my next point now, which is kind of like taking everything I just said to you and kind of putting it into practice, which is this. I think a really good practice for, okay, you've decided you're gonna get better at something, and you're going to start practicing that thing, and you're gonna start finding and kind of learning the rules and stuff like that. All right. I'm obviously I'd rather be drawing, so I'm using drawing as my example here. But the idea here, right? Start keeping a flat file and or a sketchbook. So I'm not a sketchbook artist, and you don't have to be a sketchbook artist. And I think that's another thing too, that some artists don't realize, that like you see it and you're told it for so long. They're like, oh yeah, keep a sketchbook and all this kind of stuff. I don't keep a sketchbook. I keep a flat file. I think it's my left-handedness. I draw on the binding. I don't know. I need to be able to spin. You've even probably seen me do it. I've kind of turned this paper several times to kind of get different angles here. But I need a flat piece of paper to draw on. It's how I kind of do my thing, right? So I keep a flat file though. I have literal I have some of them back here actually, like flat binder folders like this that I will right here. I'll put the date on it, and then I will kind of shove everything I've drawn or sketched or whatever for that month, and then I put that somewhere else, and I keep stacks of those, because what I always recommend is that 6 months from the time you've drawn something, or like maybe you set a date, like the 1st or the 15th of every month, you pull out your flat file, your sketchbook from that long ago. Like grab your 6 months ago flat file or sketchbook and kind of see your progress that you've made. And a really cool thing that happens is this, and it's two things. Sometimes you see your progress and you realize you've done something wrong. Like you're like, oh shoot, actually the way I used to draw eyes is actually pretty cool. And then I learned this thing and now I feel like I'm drawing them this way. Then you can do that thing I just talked about. You can be like, okay, cool. I learned how to properly draw them, but the way I used to put a little bit of my spin on it was cool. And you can kind of find that happy medium, and that way you don't push yourself too far in one direction. And you kind of keep that thing that you love. Because I do think this is a reason why some people, I don't know if the word disagree is correct with sort of these things I've been talking about these past couple episodes, but kind of like are hesitant about them, is that they're like, but if I learn everything about there is about art, what if I ruin this innate thing that I was going to make without it? And you're like, well, then keep up with that. Like track yourself and make different decisions, and don't just give yourself the excuse of just blindly just drawing every day and hoping that you become a master of your craft, right? So I think that's a really good practice to start. If you don't already, put dates. You don't have to write them on your thing. I don't write on my thing, but somewhere where you keep your stuff in your studio, your basement, wherever you draw, keep dates and keep track of that stuff. Oh, thanks a lot, Dee Dee. I appreciate the props. What's up, Ronnie? Glad you could join me, man. All right, let's move on to the next point. So I'm hearing my computer making tons of noise here, and it's kind of distracting me. I'm kind of fiddling with things. I forgot to bring my charger, so we're crossing our fingers I don't die in the middle of this cast, because it was already pretty low when I popped it open. I was doing some Photoshop sort of gray tone color stuff this morning when I got here. All right, so oh yes, we talked about that. Sometimes it's small improvement, and sometimes you move backwards, but you want to kind of keep your eye on that. Okay, so here's my kind of last thing. I'm already kind of in here for the wrap up kind of thing. So get out of your comfort zone. This is the final thing for growth and for just staying in the growth mindset. So it's really easy. And actually, I do it way more often than I should. And so it's kind of why I'm bringing it up, because when I say these things out loud in our podcasts and stuff, it's kind of how I keep myself accountable. But you gotta try something new every once in a while, even if it doesn't work. Because a lot of times it doesn't work, and then you're like, well, that feels like a waste of time. And I want you to get out of that mindset too. Like a big growth mindset thing is that nothing you do in your craft is a waste of time. Because even if you decide like, okay, hey, I've never tried a full value, really cool pencil sketch, and then you do it and you're like, whoa, man, I hate pencil. Well, now you know you hate pencil, right? So I use this example all the time because when I was in college, like before I started sort of doing what I do now, I was just drawing because they told me to, right? Like everything I made in my sketchbook or for art was all for the goal of my grade and sort of making sure that I was passing my classes and stuff like that. Like obviously I knew I loved art, and I doodled and stuff through high school and beforehand, but like I'd kind of fallen into this trap of just like only doing the things that I was told and because I was supposed to. And so what ended up happening was I got out of college and was like, what do I want to draw now? And it was Inktober, was like the next month of me like kind of sitting down and being like, okay, I know I like to draw more than just drawing. Like I'm ready to take this thing seriously. Like, what's my next step? And so I inked, and I literally, like, I wouldn't say never. Obviously, I probably picked it up at some point and done something in ink. I imagine I had to have some kind of experience in college, but I couldn't remember it. But the moral of my story here is this idea that I didn't touch ink until I got out of college, and now it is my main choice. Like it is my media that I love. That I the Dee Dee even made a good comment of it, but like this using blacks and negative space and that kind of thing is like, it was so natural for my style to kind of play with like these thick expressive line weights and things like that. And it took me what I don't even know, 25 years to even touch or know the media like was existed for me to like play with and stuff like that. And recently, here's another really good example. I've been using screen tone in my art, and I mean, I've known that's existed, but I never really played with it, and now I love that too. So I mean, I have two medias that I feel like I'm going to stick with for a very long time here. I really only found in a very young and recent part of my art career. So if you don't take the time to step out of your comfort zone and experience some things, you might never find that media that was going to be or will be your media, and you might set yourself back because of that. I do think I